program for British Columbia's Chinook Salmon reference fishery. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Just got to familiarize myself with this. Awesome. Thank you very much. Just a quick background on the British Columbia recreational fishery. BC is on the western coast of Canada. We have about 27,000 kilometers of coastline. Most of it is inaccessible by road, boat or aircraft only. A lot of it very sheltered, excellent fishing opportunity. We have about 320,000 licensed anglers in 2024. It's also significantly important from an economic perspective, about 1.3 billion in total revenue, 9,100 jobs, and most of those jobs in small coastal communities that are transitioning from historic resource extraction to more tourism-based economies. So it's a big deal for us. The background towards reference fisheries is in 2019, we had a massive landslide on the Fraser River. The Fraser River is our largest and most productive salmon watershed in British Columbia. And this landslide significantly compromised some very key and important Chinook stocks. Chinooks have been identified as by far the most iconic and sought after species in our marine tidal water fisheries and in river fisheries, largely because of their big size. They fight hard, they're good to eat, all those things. And so what do we do? We had a conservation concern of significant proportion on our hands. And so what happened is that closures were implemented sorry about that, folks. Can't seem to advance it now. I'm not sure what I did. There we go. I need to go back a bit. Okay, what we did was impose some pretty significant fishing restrictions in the area, the inside area where the map is there. This incorporates the bulk of British Columbia's population. It's a lot of sheltered water. So in order to balance the need to avoid stocks of concern and still maintain some of the social and economic benefits of Chinook salmon fisheries, we implemented what's called Mark-Selective Fisheries. And this is where we are able to harvest Chinook salmon that have had their adipose fin removed, which indicates their status as hatchery-origin, and then release unmarked fish. All of the stocks of concern are unmarked. This was funded through the Pacific Salmon Strategy Initiative, which was an awesome program, multi-government program, both state and federal, in BC that ran from 2023 to 2025 with an unprecedented investment in salmon recovery, rebuilding, stock assessment, that type of thing. Included expanding dockside interviews and flights, and most importantly for this presentation, conducting a fishery-independent reference fishery. Fishery-independent simply means that although we chartered guides to maximize our catch per unit effort, I was one of them. We used staff, data collection staff that were independent from the fishery to help remove any potential bias. So how do we typically go about monitoring Chinook catches in British Columbia? We have a combination of methods that includes internet surveys, creel surveys, overflights, that type of thing, and lodge and guide, charter guide and resort logbooks. But for this, what's relevant to this particular talk is dockside monitoring. So in the south coast of BC, we typically do about 10 to 15,000 dockside interviews. It runs May to September, which is the peak of our fishing season, which is largely weather dependent and also migration dependent. It's when the fish are around, it's when you actually want to be in a boat. What's taken there is the status of kept and released fish. So you'll get interviewed, how many did you keep, how many did you let go? We will also, by the dock surveyors will also indicate the mark rate, which we can do visually, and then they'll take some biosamples so that we can get some GSI results. Interesting to note that in British Columbia, dockside interviews are mandatory. You, as an angler, you have to comply with a dockside interview. So hence we needed a reference fishery. So what are the objectives of the reference fishery? Are to independently verify at-sea release estimates. We don't get those except through interviews. to estimate the proportion of marked Chinook with the adipose fin removed, and to identify stock composition of all Chinook that are vulnerable to the fishery, which of course in the dockside interviews we can't get because those fish are released. What does a reference fishery allow us to do? It'll help us see what we can't see in the MSF, which is really that stock composition information, which will help us understand. It's important for me to back up a little bit and note that these Mark-Selective Fisheries were created based on a strong collaboration between the Sport Fishing Advisory Board and DFO stock assessment to help understand through creel and logbook data where we think the stocks of concern weren't, combined with spatial information that helped us avoid their migration routes. Enabled us to test our assumptions as to how accurate the creel survey it is. It is a memory-based survey, and just to understand whether or not anglers were remembering properly or whether they were telling us the truth. By understanding the relationship between the creel survey and a reference fishery, it might enable us to forecast the performance of future reference fisheries based on creel surveys. So how do we go about collecting the data? As I indicated, in order to optimize our catch per unit effort, we use professional fishermen. So we chartered charter guides. Clearly the reason people hired them is because of their CPUE, so figured it would be better than anywhere else. And we were told as charter guides to fish as other anglers were fishing. So to go out, use standardized methods, fish in the same location as other anglers so that we could mirror the normal recreational fishery as much as possible. What kind of data were we collecting? Obviously a visual look at whether or not an adipose fin was there or not. Legal and sublegal size, you can actually see some of our bios technicians measuring the length of a Chinook salmon. So legal and sublegal, it's interesting to note that in our area, there are two different legal and sublegals. And this is legal, meaning you're allowed to keep it or not. There are minimum size limits in the eastern portion of the study area, 62 centimeters, in the western portion, 45 centimeters. To collect the all-important tissue sample, we did that with a one-hole punch off the caudal fin. Scan for pit tags. A lot of hatchery-produced Chinook in Canada and the United States have got pit tags inserted in them before they're released, and of course that will tell us a whole bunch more information about that fish that we're not going to get from this. And then we'd also document fish condition upon release. We used a 5-point ramp score program, and with 1 being kind of perfect condition, 5 being belly up and dead when it went over the side of the boat. But it's important to note, and I'm going to put a shameless plug in for Quinn Johnston's thing. I don't know if he's in here right now, but he'll talk all about how, in collaboration with the Sport Fishing Institute of BC, we've done 5 years of research in Bamfield to understand how fishermen can alter their gear, how they handle fish, that type of thing, to minimize fishing-related incidental mortality. And we followed all of those best practices. So we've come up with a list of best practices to do that. So sampling summary, we did a total of about 780 boat days. You'll see how it built over time. Sampled just over 6,300 Chinook, about 2,700 legal, 3,600 sublegal. And so far, we processed about 3,000 GSI results. We've still got 2025 samples pending. They're still in the lab getting run. Again, right now you'll see it's sort of a 50-50 split between legal and sublegal, remembering that legal are fish that would be vulnerable for retention. So how did it work out in terms of once we got that GSI back? So did our assumption that Mark-Selective Fisheries were going to avoid stocks of concern, was that borne out? And yes, it was. I'm not going to mess this up by trying the pointer, but if you look at the stock notifications on the right, the top 3 are stocks of concern. Those are the ones we are trying to avoid. And then if you look at the red circle, you'll see that we avoided them. The 65 there, the purple one, is, I believe, Fraser Falls, which is a highly abundant natural stock. The one next to that is Summer 4 sub 1s, I believe. Again, a highly abundant natural stock. And then what you'll note, the upper section there is unmarked Chinook. So Chinook still with an adipose fin on. The bottom one is hatchery Chinook, and look at the significant component of unmarked Chinook that come from Washington State. So we have to put a hearty thanks out to our neighbors to the south for A, having a significant hatchery program, and B, 100% mass marking. So every Chinook produced in a hatchery in Washington State has its adipose fin clip removed, which means that you can gain data like this. So without the reference fishery, without being able to do this, because we're not able to sample release fish, we wouldn't understand whether or not the Mark-Selective Fisheries were achieving the desired effect as a conservation tool to help anglers avoid stocks of concern. But by doing this, we found out that they're able to do that. Another important feature, though, is mark rates. And there's two ways to look at mark rates. One is through angler satisfaction. So if you have a mark-selective fishery where there are a significant number of marked fish available, then anglers are going to be able to retain a fish and hopefully move on to fish for something else or end their day. If you have a low mark rate, then anglers are going to turn over a whole bunch of fish in order to retain one. So you can see here that it varies by area, but we can see that the ones with the lowest mark rates were actually mixed bag fisheries where you are able to retain an unmarked fish. Another important feature of what we're seeing here is the difference between the creel interviews and what we saw in the reference fishery. And that is that it seemed that anglers being interviewed tended to underestimate the mark rate, whereas the reference fishery demonstrated the true mark rate. So what that does is it helps us understand, if we can understand, the relationship between the creel survey and a reference fishery. It'll help us understand how we might be able to not have to do reference fisheries, which are expensive, and maybe adjust the results we have from regular creel surveys to help us estimate how we can deal with future mark-selective fisheries. As we move forward in time, there's a feeling that mark-selective fisheries will be more, we'll do more of them. Because in British Columbia, we are, and particularly through the Sport Fishing Advisory Board, Sport Fishing Institute, we have a highly collaborative relationship with DFO. We feel it's important for all of our data to be accessible, transparent, and easy to use for anybody that wants to use it. We have a very sectorized fishery in British Columbia with commercial fisheries, indigenous fisheries, and recreational fisheries all kind of competing for the same pie and all wanting to know what each other's doing. So we've created a dashboard to help us understand that. It's easily accessible. People can get in there. They can work with the data. They can do whatever they need to do to help them understand. And then finally, what are the conclusions we draw from this work? Reference fisheries definitely provided a baseline of stock composition. So that was perhaps the most important piece of information we could get out of these. Are reference fishery, are MSFs doing what we wanted them to do? And the answer is yes. They can also, as I talked about, if you can figure out the relationship between information in a reference fishery and what we're getting from the creel survey, you can understand that relationship, you can inform future decisions. We know now that particularly for mark rates, the assumption that creels were providing reliable information needs to be reconsidered. And stock assessment and fisheries management need to work together to align MSF planning with the capacity of available monitoring tools. I hate to end on this note, but this is an example of how stock assessment and fishery management are two separate divisions under the larger umbrella of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and they're not effectively talking to each other. And this is a way of demonstrating that they should be. And then we can decide on future reference fishery requirements in collaboration. We're hoping we don't need more. We're hoping that we're going to have a significant rebound of these Fraser River stocks of concern. The good news is that's happening. Mother Nature is taking care of itself. They are being resilient. They are rebounding, and it's 2026, so their 5-year-old stocks are the oldest stocks, and we're starting to see significant rebounds in them. So, and I think that's it for my end. Thank you very much for listening to me. It's a real pleasure to be here today.